Hello and welcome to Deep In Pact, a proud member of the Duff Network, where we dive deep into Wildbow's most inhuman work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we pick up with Execution 13.8, which begins after one of the saddest things we've seen since Blake entered the Abyss, and maybe even since the start of the story, where Jeremy is defining his terms for betraying Sandra. It basically starts with him setting up exactly in what ways he's going to betray her, or betray the family while trying to not hurt her or any specific Duchamp.
Yeah, I like how this sort of immediately appeals to this concept Blake has somewhat loosely been working off of people being monsters. Where, you know, Jeremy's thing is basically, I don't want to just kill anyone, you know, they sort of have to, well, he doesn't want to kill anyone, and Blake works him down to unless they deserve it.
Yep.
But, you know, like it really gave me good feelings about how this was going to go right from the start, because it's sort of like, okay, you know, Jeremy's on team fuck the Duchamp family as a symbol because it's awful, but he doesn't want to go around killing people. And I was like, this is good. This could have a good effect on Blake, hopefully.
Yeah. Again, Jeremy is the right type of willing to murder people, you know? Willing, but not as eager as Blake.
Yeah.
And so I think it's worth pointing out that it seems pretty clear here, and it becomes even clearer later on in the chapter, that Jeremy's okay with murdering some of these Duchamp husbands, which, I mean, he was kind of, we saw as the de facto leader of the Duchamp husbands. So if I were them, I'd be pretty pissed off, because their more or less leader was just like defected and then started agreeing to murder them.
Well, yeah, but just the shit ones. Well, yeah, I don't know why I'm defending him. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I wonder if there are any Duchamp husbands that are just kind of looking around awkwardly like, you know, they're not huge pieces of shit, they're only just a bit of a piece of shit. And they're looking around like, ooh, I don't know if I want to be in this group.
Yeah, well, they don't really get to see Jeremy, so they don't, as far as I'm aware, they may not know about this. Like, I don't know how much Sandra would have just given this info up.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you feel like it would be a politically bad move for her to say, yes, my husband has defected and is going to try and murder some of you.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Blake makes it pretty clear later that he's only interested in killing a select few.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I they may not have as much concern to be worried as maybe they should.
Yeah. This is a pretty sad scene though, right? Like, Jeremy and Sandra's, I guess, negotiation before their goodbye, again, just reaffirms how much kind of mutual respect they have for each other, and how sad it is, especially for Sandra. I feel, it's weird, I feel bad for her. Like, despite everything, I do still have some respect for her, and I feel bad that she's losing the one not kind of terrible thing in her life.
Yeah, but that's the thing. She lost it long ago when the whole thing of Dionysus versus what the Duchamp family stood for pulled them apart. So it's like, it was already gone, and they've basically just been clinging on to this false sense that it's still there to some degree. I mean, yeah, this whole thing is so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's somehow worse since Sandra is like, oh, I knew that this was coming.
Yeah.
You know, she obviously knew that they're a sort of, I mean, Romeo and Juliet feels like a tacky kind of comparison, but, you know, like they're sort of from these incompatible practices, kind of.
Yeah.
And she's known that this sort of thing was going to have to come eventually. But they've just been, they both care for each other, so they didn't want it to. Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. I kind of like Sandra, and I'm upset that this is happening to her, which I also hate, because she kind of admits here that she's like, yeah, I knew you'd come for the Duchamp family because you're angry about what happened to us because of it. And it's like, well, shouldn't you be? Like, yeah, I don't know. You know, I feel so bad for her, but at the same time, it's like, you're the head of this shit family now. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
She's probably sworn oaths so that she has to, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if we'll get to see Sandra more concretely wrestle with some of the stuff about the Duchamp family that is being brought to the forefront here. I'm not sure. I mean, she's obviously picked her side on it, but even so, I can't imagine it's easy for her to continue to justify what's going on in the face of, how the harsh realities that Blake is making them confront.
Yeah, I mean, she seems like an intelligent person, so it's hard to believe that she's not confronting this on some level.
Yeah. So Jeremy and his coterie begin to retreat before realizing that now that they're on Team Blake, there's no such thing as retreat. So Blake decides, let's continue some stalking, and Jeremy sends 2 satyrs to help him dispatch the Ritchie brothers.
Blake really is a dog with a bone when it comes to this sort of stuff, isn't he? Like this reminded me of, the end of Arc 7, where everyone's like, you should probably stop now and take a break or whatever. And I mean, in this instance, he's kind of right. Like, they're tired, they're on the back foot. This is kind of the perfect time to strike. And I mean, he seems to have been right. But you can't help but get that sense of this is just Blake being like, no, I got to choose the mission.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. You're right. It does remind one of the end of Arc 7, which didn't end so hot for Blake. His relentless pursuit of confrontation obviously caused him to be so fucked over by fate, I suppose.
Yeah,
I don't know. We'll see. There's another fun hint where Jeremy basically is unwilling to fight against the Mason, the benevolent. Again, the build up to this guy is insane. We'll talk about that in a bit, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
There's also a moment where Green Eyes basically quite obviously checks out one of these 2 satyrs who are, described as attractive masculine figures, right? And I'm kind of unsure whether it's Green Eyes. Well, it's obviously Green Eyes actually thinks they're attractive, but I kind of feel like she's just playing this up for Blake's benefit.
I don't know. She tries to hide it afterwards. I think, I think she's just got that insatiable appetite for human flesh.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I like what you wrote here. Do you want to read it out, Elliot?
Oh, yeah. So the other line I was thinking about going with was, I'm surprised there was any water left in the lake by the time they summoned her at the end of Arc 11, because Green Eyes seems pretty thirsty.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. So speaking of horrifying lines, there's this line that Evan says where he's talking about how Blake's eyes seem to be really bad. And this is a beat we've seen a few times where Green Eyes and Evan, and also one of these satyrs in this chapter, are so more easily able to pick things out in the kind of darkness and distance than Blake is. And so Evan talks about how he should get new eyes, and Blake's like, I'm fine with my eyes, thanks. And Evan says, maybe if you plucked out your eyes and let them regrow, which would probably work, but this is horrifying. And it kind of makes me think, I'm pretty sure I figured it out. Evan has actually been replaced by Podrick. It's a Maggie Holt situation. I think that explains why Evan's acting so weird.
That's some real good glamour. Yeah, I mean, well, it couldn't be Podrick because he's been gone for a while now. Like, so he's not in the story anymore. He mysteriously disappeared long ago.
Yeah,
I mean, something that came up in the live read was that I made a list at the end of the chapter. I was like, but we've still got like a barber upstairs and a missing crow person.
Yeah,
and then our Discord just kind of turned into people listing other potential dangers. Like,
there's a lot out there.
Yeah, and I was just like, wow, Blake's in so much trouble. Yeah. Yeah, so obviously Podrick is one who didn't make that list, but probably should have because he's off somewhere. But to go back to Evan's quote, it kind of feels like maybe Evan is being Blake is having a bit of an impact on him. Like, it feels like this very, why not just use your body and give in? Like, it seems like a very fair thing for Evan to suggest, because Blake has kind of wantonly been turning himself into a monster to improve his battle situations. Like,
yeah,
I think given the context of how Blake has been treating himself as well as Evan very recently, it doesn't really seem like such a crazy suggestion. I see this as Blake having influence on Evan of a very bad kind.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that Evan is encouraging Blake's self-sacrifice. That can't be a good sign, surely.
No, no, I agree. Although at the same time, I think the way Evan just kind of wonders this question, that does feel like a very maybe I was just a weird kid. That feels like the sort of thing you'd wonder, like just oh well, if you pluck your eyes out, maybe you'll get new super eyes. I don't know. I actually thought that was a fairly normal thought. Maybe I'm just a weirdo. Let's move on.
Yeah, I mean, it probably would work, right?
I mean, maybe he's already got. Doesn't he already have like 6 eyes or something? That was something that was brought up in one of the interludes.
Yeah, the birds.
Sure. Yeah,
the birds in his body. So, so Team Blake, which is Blake, Green Eyes, Evan, and these two satyrs, they kind of slowly close in on the Ritchie brothers, basically avoiding a wealth of mystical diagrams that have been left around as they close in.
And there's a quick final part to this discussion where they sort of like, hey Blake, how much like flesh do you sort of have left? Like Evan and Green Eyes are sort of like, how's your whole flesh situation going? And he just refuses to answer.
Yeah.
So that's great. And I think we'll talk about it a bit more about that as we get into the fight at the end of the chapter. But yeah, obviously they start to make their way towards these brothers, and it's actually like a pretty cool stealth section.
Yeah. So the past, 3 or 4 chapters have basically, on paper, their one-sentence summaries are Blake hunts down and kills a few Duchamp husbands. But it's great how each of them has felt so different. This one feels a lot more stealthy and cautious than all the other ones have, kind of more intrigue-based, which I really liked. It's felt very distinct over the past few chapters, even though they are all tangibly Blake just doing some Duchamp murders.
Yeah, I remember we talked about something similar during the siege of the house, like an arc or so ago, like where it was, every chapter was just another part of the others invading the house, but each setting felt really unique and led to a completely different type of fight.
Yeah.
When you had like a different other and a different room, and that's sort of what this has been as well, is Blake has sort of been pursuing these Duchamps through different environments and focusing on different ones. And yeah, it's just something I think the story has been very strong at overall, is making every fight feel really unique due to a mixture of setting and the people in the fight.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and so Blake is kind of sneaking around. He actually goes around a lot of diagrams, which is the exact opposite of what he did last chapter. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, obviously these diagrams don't have presence in the center to bait him in, but it's interesting that he seems to be acting a little differently than he did last chapter.
Well, I think if he'd seen a hole that he could walk through in these ones, he would have. I mean, that's basically what he does. There's a big hole between two diagrams. But you know what I mean. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is somewhat consistent, although he does seem to be resisting this urge to just rush in. He's trying to make sure he does his mission as well as possible.
Yeah. And he basically closes in and is about to pounce on the Duchamps when suddenly the satyrs betray him. And we had this set up earlier in the chapter where Jeremy was talking about how he'd get bad karma for betraying Sandra, and this seems to be, or at least in Jeremy's opinion, is the bad karma manifesting itself through the satyrs betraying Blake by screaming a kind of battle scream as they charge in, which gives away everyone's position. And Blake still decides to leap on into danger and is now surrounded by an indescribed but relatively large, one would think, number of competent practitioners.
Yeah, it was all going so well. Like, we sort of skimmed over. There's this whole bit where they sneak past the homunculus gargoyle thing that acts like a security camera. And all that, and it's like all flowing so well, and then it just all goes to shit, and I was just like, oh, of course, why did I think this was going to continue to go well? Yeah. Have I not been reading the story?
Yeah, you forgot what story this was for a second.
Yeah. I do like, sorry, this is just a quick aside, I only just thought of it. There's a little bit where he notes, there's a bit of Blake's language where he implies that he can see where the homunculus is looking. Like almost like he kind of has this understanding of its current field of view. And just, I feel like there's been a few tidbits, including like that golden light he saw a few chapters ago that we were questioning. It kind of feels like maybe he's starting to get his sight back. And I don't know what that means.
Well,
but like I'm starting to wonder if that's what's happening.
Yeah, there have been a few beats, and I didn't really put it together until you said something along this line in our notes, but there have been a few beats of things like his eyes seeming to get worse in general, his sight seeming to return, things like this that seem to be hinting towards Blake coming back a bit. The fact that he stepped down at the end of last chapter against Jeremy, like a few things that make it seem like his interaction with Jeremy has at least quieted his monstrousness a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't know. There seems to be a few things, and I guess like the question that leaves me with is like why? Like, has something happened to Rose? Would probably be my first guess, but I guess we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah. To completely go against that, Blake now basically beats the shit out of a bunch of practitioners before executing two of them so far.
Yeah, he kicks ass in this segment. It's pretty cool. There's an interesting bit where he does some cool moves where he like stops people from being able to practice by like getting in early, and he sort of says to himself, in this, like this, karma was on my side. Declare my opponents, stick to the plan, be what I was supposed to be. And I just found that interesting because it's like a very different attitude to what he had like an arc ago when he was out of the tenements and was very much on team, I'm going to completely crumble the whole universe's structure. Now he seems to kind of be accepting his role in the universe and taking strength from it, which is interesting.
Yeah, and that kind of I don't know what to think, because you're right that that's true, but then it also feels like that's the opposite of what we just said, right? Like there's a few conflicting signals here about what Blake is, and maybe that's the answer. Maybe he's just kind of settling into himself a bit more. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's two sides of him at war in a way, and there have been for a while now. So it kind of makes sense when we get to these conflicting ideas that it's, you know, he's kind of struggling with two sides to himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I read this as somewhat of a good sign based on how the chapter ends, but let's touch on that when we get there, I guess.
Okay, sure. So just quickly, there's a line where they're talking about the Ritchie brothers. Blake mentions the Ritchie brothers being on his kill list, and Mason Hall McCullough, the benevolent, says, "I'm on the list too," he called out, almost cheerful. "Wait your turn," Evan shouted. Again, I just love this character. I'm kind of sad how quickly he resolves, because I would have loved to see more of him.
Yeah, I agree. This is hilarious. It's one of the funniest bits in the chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So this fight kind of breaks out, and one of the practitioners, a Goblin King, throws this toad at Blake, which grows until it morphs into this big, horrifying goblin. And it's intimidating. It's probably one of the more powerful others that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, but what kind of horrible person would just pick up their familiar and throw them across... never mind. That's Blake too.
Yeah, whoops, never mind. I want to talk about this goblin because it feels like a bit of a weird mirror of Blake. Like, I kind of got this perspective when I was reading it. The fact that it has this... it's got like its suite of goblin tools, right? And I love how horrific it is and how horrific its goblin weapons are. And it's kind of explicitly called out that one of its weapons reminds Blake of the hyena, which I also love. It's the only other that we've seen that uses others. Figure out which one of those are capitalized and which ones aren't yourself. The only other one of those we've seen is Blake, and I absolutely love that he fights it, and it kind of... I don't think he ever puts two and two together on it, but it at least to me, is a very good example of like, hey Blake, this is your monstrous path, so, steer clear.
Yeah, I mean, just the concept of having a goblin that collects and uses other goblin weapons was already so great, but then to have him fighting off against our main character, who's also become a bit of a collector of such fine antiquities, is so thematically interesting. You're right, Blake doesn't really put two and two together, but it's hard not to see the story trying to make a comment on Blake's current status, I guess, through this.
Yeah, definitely. And this goblin is disgusting. One of its weapons is a dagger that it uses to cut open a car and then give birth to naked little baby goblins, which is horrifying. And the dagger has like a screaming goblin woman face on it. It's like, it's all really gross.
Yeah. I mean, also his axe that just spurts out flesh from anything it hits. There's a hilarious bit where one of those babies gets hit while it's in Blake's mouth and just sort of explodes with an noise.
Yeah.
It's hilariously disgusting. I mean, that's like goblins are so much fun. Like, God, they're fucking disgusting. I love it.
Yeah, it's gross.
So there's also a bit here where Blake gets stabbed by the goblin and his sword, ? Blake doesn't really seem to think about this much.
Yeah, it's the most nonchalant facial stab wound I've ever seen.
Yeah, like even reading it the second time, I was like, he did get stabbed, right? Like that's like it seems like he got grazed across his forehead or something. A bunch of blood goes into his mouth. He has to spit it out. That's it reminds me of that fairy fight in Arc 2. But yeah, I guess he just sort of doesn't think about it. And there's a few other bits in this fight where he starts to lose flesh, and we've just had a conversation earlier in the chapter about how he doesn't have much left, and now like bits of his face are starting to get got. He almost loses his eyes later on as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
The goblin also gets rid of the weapon after it seems to not really bother Blake so much, which I guess means that it was probably meant to have some awful effect that just didn't affect Blake.
Yeah, it was supposed to turn him into a horrifying monster, but for some reason it just didn't do anything to Blake. I don't know. Weird. Let's not read too much into it. Blake is fighting this goblin, and the goblin basically forces Blake to step away, and Blake almost gets bound by one of these binding circles that are just around. Evan helps him a few times before flying off to help Green Eyes, and as Evan flies away, the big goblin opens its mouth and shoots, using some gunpowder-infused teeth, shoots Evan.
This is the coolest thing ever. Like, as if this goblin wasn't already cool enough with his other goblin trinkets, it turns out, like, his body transformation, like all his nails and stuff, goes even deeper, and he somehow put a crossbow with 3 barrels in his mouth. That's so cool.
Yeah, this goblin's pretty fucked up, right? He's basically got a shotgun in his mouth.
Yeah, it's insane.
And so here's an interesting thing. We've seen Evan get shot before, right? We saw this happen in the police station, and I remember the feeling that it caused in Blake when it happened. That didn't happen this time, but I felt that. I mean, I, as the reader, had that sinking feeling in my heart. But Blake didn't seem to have the same feeling that he had when Evan got injured. He didn't get shot, sorry. Someone, like, snapped his neck or something. I don't really
Duncan.
remember.
It was Duncan.
Duncan, of course. Yeah, and it's wild. So this kind of confirms that their connection definitely isn't what it used to be. But it's very scary, and Blake kind of... Like, it feels like Blake is about to get tipped over the edge, and he actually has quite an interesting reaction, which I think we'll touch on in a second.
Yeah, I mean, I went through the same thing. I was like, oh god, no, not Evan.
Yeah,
like,
I know, right?
Please. Because I'm kind of waiting for something to be that last push for Blake, because he's so on the brink. Like, we've just talked about how little flesh he has. And then the thought of losing Evan, I was like, well, fuck, that would do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and especially like, we talked last chapter about the difference between his emotional and his physical damage. Losing Evan would sort of be the last emotional straw, I think. But he does have some emotional reaction to this, because he talks about how much the birds in his stomach are fluttering before he picks Evan up and puts him in there with them.
Yeah. I want to kind of describe what happens next, because we've been talking about this chapter about how it seems like there's this push and pull between Blake's, I'm just going to call them his monstrous and his human side, but obviously it's a bit deeper than that. Blake's immediate response is he looks at the big goblin, and you can see in his eyes there's a path that he could go down of basically freaking the fuck out and murdering this thing. But he doesn't. He goes to check on Evan first. And coincidentally, this is kind of what saves him from another attack that this goblin lets loose. And then he starts to freak out, right? And the question that Blake asks himself, and the interesting question here, I think, is this anger and rage the monstrous or the human part, right? Is checking on Evan a human moment of him being kind of concerned for one of his closest companions, or this kind of monstrous thought of utility, which I think reminds me of, a chapter or two ago, Blake thinking, oh no, I've lost my lockpick, I better go check on him. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, it's Pact. It's probably both.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was sort of, I sort of had a different read on this section, I guess. I sort of got the impression he agrees that both parts of him want revenge. Although, interestingly, he talks about how the human part of him wants revenge of a different sort for a different reason, which I don't think I fully understand what that line might have been trying to tell me. But what's very interesting, and I think is really sort of the through line of this chapter, is this idea that he decides that what's more important is the mission. Like, he basically picks Evan up and goes back to killing the practitioners. Yeah. And obviously he did the same thing with Jeremy early in the chapter. We see how strong his resolve is when he knocks off the third person from his list at the end of the chapter. It's it's interesting. Like, he seems to be defining himself by this mission right now, which is almost complete. He's only got one name left by the end of this chapter, and it's supposed to be someone who's fairly easy, but we'll see how that works out.
Yeah.
You clearly can't trust how tough everyone says someone's going to be. But I don't know. It's interesting how, like, he just sort of tucks Evan away and almost moves past the emotions of it, which doesn't feel very human. It feels very methodical. He just embraces the mission in this moment. And I can't decide whether I think that's a good or a bad thing.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. He puts Evan inside his heart hole, nice, to keep him safe. And he kind of re-engages the goblin before choosing to abandon this goblin and kind of turning and attacking the Ritchie brothers, which is, again, very on mission. And you're right, it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe the point is there's no distinction between the monstrous and the human Blake, right? Or I don't know, like, either in Blake or in general, maybe the monstrous and the human is a bit of an arbitrary distinction. Maybe the point we're meant to take is they are just these pieces of a whole. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I think you're right, because the through line, I'm overusing that word. The sort of thought here is Blake goes, the monstrous part of me wants violent revenge. The human part of me wants a slightly different type of revenge. They're both for Evan. But me as a whole, like, I want something different. And I guess maybe that's sort of a clue. Like, we talk so much about the human side of Blake and the monstrous side of Blake, but if Blake is really, from the get-go, he was sort of half other. He was only half a person. Like, is there a third part? Like, is this a Blake triangle, not a Blake seesaw?
Interesting.
Like, there's this, because that's sort of what he starts to hint at here. Is there's this idea of, aside from the human part of him and aside from the monster part of him, there's this inherent Blake part of him, and he talks about how he was going to be Blake. I think it was at the end of 13.6. Now, we talked about how he seemed to not be very human in 13.7. Maybe that's because we were missing the point. Maybe Blake is something that's not human, but it's not monstrous. It's just other.
Yeah, maybe it's. So what you're thinking, what you said, makes me think of the fact that Blake's connection to his past has also been something that kind of ebbs and flows. Maybe there's something there about that we'll kind of see emerging as tying Blake to his kind of core Blakeness, because his fictional, or not his past, doesn't seem to be his human or his monstrous side, but it's something that ebbs and flows with him, kind of distinct from that. So maybe there's something there.
Well, and if that is right, like, what it like, that to me will feel kind of like a bit of the thesis statement for the story in a way. Like, what are we saying about what is Blake? Because that'd essentially be what we're doing. We're saying, if you take the human and you take the monster out, what is the core of this person? Is that the right word?
This entity.
What is it that? Yeah, what is it that makes it /him? I don't know what pronouns to use because I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I don't know. I'm very interested to see if that's right, where it will go over the next few arcs.
Yeah, we'll see, I suppose. So back to the brutal murders. Blake cuts off one of the brothers' heads and murders the other one. It's very brutal. It's one of the more violent kills that we've seen.
Yeah. I mean, technically, so obviously one of them gets their head completely taken off. We can assume that one's dead. The other one, all that's mentioned is it took the flesh axe to the groin. So we don't know that they're dead, but we can assume, right? Blake seems to. And this flesh axe has kind of explosive flesh properties. I assume this guy didn't take it very well.
Yeah. We do later see that all of Team Blake is pretty much covered in blood, so I'm assuming the exploding flesh was at least somewhat effective.
Oh, I thought that was from the homunculus, because Green Eyes gets pretty bloody when she's fighting it at the start. I don't know, maybe.
There's a lot of blood going around, I guess. So the big goblin is called back because it to prevent more collateral damage like this head being lopped off.
Yes.
And the benevolent Mason Hall McCullough steps forward, ready to face Blake. He says, "Strike me down if you think it's right, Blake." And Blake does.
It's so good.
Yeah.
I love how it's delivered in the text because it's barely... it just kind of quickly ends the chapter. It's not spelled out for you. I had to read it a few times and sit on it for a couple of seconds to be like, so he's killed him?
Yeah, totally.
That was it? And it's a real moment that just leaves you sitting there going, what?
Yeah.
It's such a great way to end the chapter. I love it.
Yeah, I have, obviously, I like it as well, but I have mixed feelings about it, right? Because there's a lot of build up to this benevolent character, and he has seemed so fun. And I do really like the way it, Blake basically doesn't have time for that bullshit. It's very true to who he is. And I also think the fact that as he's killed more and more people, he's kind of commented on or noticed their deaths less and less. Which I think also ties into his general transformation, which I like. Still, mixed feelings.
I agree with you that on one level, I'm a little disappointed we didn't get to see more of this guy, because he does seem, as you said, very fun. But this is so perfect, this idea of this guy with all the universe kind of protecting him, basically just sort of saying, hey, if it's right, take me down, and Blake doesn't hesitate. The universe seems to basically back him on this as this is Blake's job. I'm assuming that's sort of where karma comes into it, in that karma will aspire to have the universe protect you. The spirits will aspire to give you a hand, but they're not going to completely fight against things. So the idea that this is such a Blake thing to do, that he's just going to stab this guy, and the universe is just sort of no, that's so Blake, we're not going to stop it. It really solidifies this idea of him being so on mission, which has really been, as we talked about, the whole theme of this chapter to a degree, is Blake's mission kind of defining him here.
Yeah. It makes me think that you're right, that does imply that the universe kind of backs Blake chasing his purpose here, which kind of is interesting, because as he was trying to fight the system more obviously, I guess, he felt like the universe was acting against him. So it kind of makes me think, does that mean he's gone down the wrong path? Now he's playing into what the universe kind of and karma seems to want?
Yeah, that's the thing, because my first thought on this was, so what he's doing is he's just finding a role where the universe will let him fight against it. And it's but isn't that kind of what half the young Duchamps keep saying they're going to do? It's I'm going to get to a position where I can do it. I guess my best analogy, if we look at our old capitalist metaphor, is Blake's trying to set himself up as some sort of disruptor. I don't know.
Yeah, and all disruptors eventually just become big companies, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it is very interesting. And we brought up that line earlier where Blake is the universe is with me when I do this and act like a boogeyman, and we see it again here. So I just can't decide whether I think it's a good thing or not.
Yeah. I don't know. And this is the second last chapter of this arc, so I suspect some of these themes will come to a head more next chapter.
Yes, we've got one person left on the list who is meant to be the loner, which is very interesting in our world of connections and how Blake's been doing with those this arc. And Blake has about one person's fight left of flesh on his body, so very interested to see how we do within the next chapter.
Yeah. We'll see, I suppose. Before then, though, let's dive into some mythology. It's time to take a look at some monsters, and the monster we've chosen to take a look at today is the troll. No, not the keyboard warrior kind, the other kind.
The ones with troll tolls.
Yeah, the ones where you have to pay the troll toll. The one that Troll in Central Park is. And trolls are an interesting thing to me because I kind of, a lot of times with Monster Corner, we dive into it and we find there's a lot of stuff that isn't common knowledge. But trolls are so common, right? Trolls and goblins and stuff are some of the more common fantasy creatures, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, etc. And so there's a lot of stuff here that kind of was already in the public consciousness. But I thought I'd pull out some quick troll facts, some fun troll facts anyway, just to dive into some of the history of what a troll is and where it comes from and how the myth has evolved over time, and just some fun troll facts. So let's do it. Let's start with some etymology, which is always a fun place to start. Troll is a word that has basically been unchanged since like the 10th century. Before then, it probably came from a Proto-Germanic word, trollen. So, you can trace trolls back to Proto-Germanic kind of Norse mythology. And actually, trolls are Norse in origin. And in Norse mythology, the word troll basically was just another name for what was called Jotun, frost giants or giants, which you'd recognize from Thor, I suppose.
And Age of Mythology.
But
no, so that's interesting because the frost giants are like the baddies in Norse mythology. Right?
Yes.
So I just find it interesting that we've gone from these, what I assume are very big, very powerful, evil things to kind of, for instance, the dolts you see in Harry Potter or something.
Yeah, and I think that transformation comes as trolls morph from Norse mythology into kind of general Scandinavian mythology. But before then, I want to kind of touch on the origins of trolls in Norse mythology. So in Norse mythology, the first troll is this creature called Ymir that's basically a hermaphroditic giant that was the first being that was created in Norse mythology, right? He asexually reproduced with himself, giving birth to trolls as a race of creatures. And it's interesting, I kind of found out that Ymir is, in Norse mythology, kind of a representation of the chaos that exists outside of creation, which made me think about In Pact. That's basically the role that demons have been said to play. Demons as these creatures that are outside of normal creation, right? Which makes me think trolls and demons both descended from the chaos outside of creation. Therefore, Duchamps and Thorburns are not that different after all.
Well, didn't Rose Senior talked a lot about her theory that everything comes from demons in some way or another.
Yeah.
Maybe indirectly, but it can all be traced. Every type of other can be traced back to demons. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that kind of lines up. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So over time, trolls from Norse mythology morph into Scandinavian mythology, and this is where trolls kind of turn into what we imagine them being today. Kind of slow and dim-witted, and maybe the word troll becomes a bit more generalized. I think we did one of our first Monster Corners on fairy, and in Gaelic, fairy folk are basically any supernatural being in Celtic or Irish kind of mythology. And that happens to an extent here with the word troll. It kind of morphs a lot. But mostly you see trolls as kind of the image of them we have today. Some fast troll facts. It's thought one kind of idea on the origin of trolls as a mythology is people seeing large stone formations that are naturally forming. Early troll mythology says that trolls will turn to stone in sunlight, and so, big, weird stone shapes can be thought to kind of lead to be trolls that were exposed to sunlight and then just turned to stone. I quite like that. There's also a fun fact I liked. In Scandinavian mythology, lightning was thought to frighten away trolls, which is fun because that's thought to be a kind of bastardization of the fact that Thor would fight the Jotun, and so lightning, Thor, would scare away the Jotun, trolls, which is just a fun little bastardization of the myth that I like.
Yeah, I like that you see that. You can see the through line there of, oh god, I'm overusing that word so much. You can see how it went from A to B. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the lack of trolls in modern Scandinavia is often accounted for by, and this is a quote, the accuracy and efficiency of the lightning strokes, which is just a fun little justification for why trolls aren't around much anymore.
Oh, good job, Thor.
Yeah. And that's just some fun troll facts. I guess you've got one more troll fact for us, Elliot.
Yes, or the McElroy brothers will be in Trolls too.
I've heard
That's my
that.
contribution.
Yeah. No, that's a good contribution, thank you. And that brings us to the end of Troll Facts, so thanks everyone for joining us.
Yes, if you are interested in discussing more troll facts with everyone, or answering our discussion question, head into the discussion thread that will be linked in the show notes below.
Yes, that discussion question is, the world of Pact is a world of systems. Games are also things made of systems. Which parts of Pact would make for good games or video games, and which parts would be bad? So again, find the discussion thread link down below and discuss that question.
Yes, and if you're enjoying Deep In Pact, if you want to tell the world how much you're enjoying it, head on over to wherever you get your podcasts from, and if they let you leave reviews, do it there and tell everyone that we're great, and then more people will discover Pact, and the world will be a better place.
Definitely. Despite what the early chapters of Pact may suggest, awakening people to the world of Pact is only a good thing. So awaken your friends, share this podcast.
Yes.
And if you'd like to stay up to date with this podcast, why not check out our Twitter, which is @MediaMDPodcast. There you can see the live reads that Elliot does every time he reads a new chapter, as well as get all the hottest Pact memes.
And isn't that what everyone wants?
Yep.
And if you're interested in learning more about the other shows that are on the Doof Network, of which we are just one single member, you can head on over to doofmedia.com. There's details on all of them. There's also a handy calendar page which will let you know when stuff's happening. So, for instance, something that's happening tomorrow is the book club. It's happening a week early and on the wrong day. So if you usually follow the book club, head on over on Saturday night, America time. Find the details on that calendar page. And join Matt and Scott as they discuss this month's book.
Yeah, and of course that calendar page is nice, but wouldn't it be nice if you could see the calendar through some kind of Bahame-themed robot that would tell you how long you had until Doof events happened? Well, fear no more, because, and I don't know why you're afraid of not having that, but in case you are, don't fear anymore, because if you become a patron at patreon.com/doofmedia, you'll gain access to the Doof Media Discord, which includes such things as the Bahame bot that tells us how long it is until things happen.
Yes, in fact, BahameBot is about to get an upgrade to version Alistair any day now.
Oh shit! We've been stuck in Duncan for so long. I hate it.
Yeah, I know. It's a long overdue iteration, but it should make BahameBot even more better and confident than ever.
Yep, awesome. While you're on Patreon, why not check out Wildbow's Patreon? Because he is a audience-supported writer. So help support him, help him continue to make cool stories by going to patreon.com/Wildbow.
Yeah, and so apart from that, we'll see everyone on Monday, the 25th of November, for Execution 13.9.
See you then.